My sister mocked me in front of 240 guests. Learn what not to do. I left home at 19 and no goodbye. A year later, she regret after learn who I became. I'm 19. And this story begins on the day I graduated from high school. What should have been one of my proudest days ever. Instead, it became the moment when everything snapped. Growing up, I wasn't the type of child to cause trouble. I wasn't overly noisy or attention-seeking. I completed my homework, kept my room clean, avoided conflicts, and even helped mom around the house without being asked. But I could never quite outshine Lily. She's 3 years younger than me, but everyone treats her like the family's crown jewel. Straight A's. So did I. When Lily brought hers home, Dad posted it on Facebook with the message, "Our future doctor." When I did the same, he just nodded and asked if I wanted to help carry the groceries. It wasn't simply grades either. She was the center of attention at every family gathering, celebration and birthday. I would receive a handshake and a gift card. She'd get a themed celebration, synchronized clothing, and a slideshow prepared by Dad himself. I learned early on not to expect too much. To be honest, for a while, I was fine with it. I assured myself it was not a competition. I didn't need all of the extras. I was silently preparing for my future. But when the time came to be honored for something I had fought so hard for, my graduation, everything came crashing down. The ceremony was decent but nothing extraordinary. I walked across the stage, received my graduation, shook hands, and smiled for the photograph. What caused the pain was what transpired subsequently. The school had put up a small area outdoors with tables and tents for families to congregate, take photos and exchange flowers. I was scanning the crowd for my parents when I noticed them near the rear, behind a tree, Lily wearing a brand new sundress and holding what appeared to be a brand new phone. When I stepped up, the first thing Dad said was not, "Congratulations," or, "We're proud of you." He glared at me and said, "There he is. Mr. Wasted Potential himself." Then he laughed. Mom laughed too. Lily laughed the loudest, tossing her hair as if it were the greatest thing she had ever heard. I smiled. What else can I do? I convinced myself it was a joke, despite the fact that my stomach was turning. They handed me a little thin dollar shop gift bag. Inside was a pair of cheap sunglasses and a card that read, "Don't let the future blind you." That was it. There was no dinner reservation, no speech, and no mention of the scholarship I had earned. Meanwhile, a sleek black automobile was parked behind them, complete with a large red bow on top. Toyota Corolla, brand new. I stared at it for a second too long, which Lily noticed. She was beaming. "It's for me," she exclaimed, gripping the keys as if she had won the jackpot, "for when I get my license this summer." "Isn't this perfect?" "Mom and Dad said it was because I've been so responsible," she explained. "And since I have real goals." I swallowed hard. Actual goals. For example, the scholarship to study environmental engineering did not count. As if the job I'd been doing almost full-time to help pay for books didn't matter. The late nights, AP classes and scientific fairs were not enough. The worst part was that no one noticed the frown on my face. Or, if they did, they weren't concerned. Dad clapped me on the back and said, "Let's snap a quick picture, right? Make it look like we're proud." We shot 4 photos. Then they began packing, claiming they wanted to beat the traffic. I stood there, clutching the bag with the sunglasses, watching them walk to the car as if I were a distant cousin rather than their own son. No meal, no family gathering, nothing. Only the sound of the motor starting and Lily's voice shrieking from the front seat. I did not accompany them home. I walked to the train station instead. I used the emergency card I had stashed in my wallet, which my Aunt Maggie Carter had given me 18 months ago, just in case things became too bad. I purchased a non-refundable ticket without telling anyone where I was going. I just sat there watching the lights fade past the window, clutching the bag with those stupid sunglasses like it was the only thing holding me together that entire day. 6 days later, I received a text from Aunt Maggie Carter. It was short. "Your mother has been crying non-stop. She assumed you'd get over it. Get past it." Years of being treated as if I didn't matter might be easily forgotten. Like a joke about wasted potential on the most important day of my life was innocuous. As if I were the one overreacting. That's when something inside me clicked. Not snapped. Clicked. It was quieter than wrath and deeper than grief. It was the steady, icy awareness that things were not going to change. Not for me. Not ever. If I wanted things to change, I'd have to be the one to make it happen, not just leave and disappear. I had to create something they couldn't ignore. Something they couldn't dismiss or claim credit for. I wasn't sure what that would look like yet. But sitting in my aunt's guest room, surrounded by stillness and a strange sense of freedom, I began formulating plans because if they believed I'd get over it, they had no idea what I was truly capable of. When I first arrived at Aunt Maggie Carter's house, she didn't ask many questions. She simply held me warmly and took me to the guest room saying, "Get some rest. We'll chat when you're ready." That was a silent understanding. I was not used to it. My parents used to say things like, "We gave you a roof over your head and everything we do is for your future." But it always sounded conditional, like love with a balance sheet. Aunt Maggie Carter demanded no explanations. I didn't even unpack on the second night. I just climbed into bed, still wearing my graduation gown, and looked at the ceiling fan for hours, hoping to feel something other than hollow. Over the next few days I gradually acclimated. Maggie served me breakfast in the mornings, let me use her home office to email my scholarship contact, and even drove me to a local college campus to look around the dorms and speak with someone about student accommodation. It wasn't my first choice school, but after what occurred at graduation, returning to my previous town and house and pretending nothing had changed was out of the question. She didn't ask too many questions, but she could sense there was more to the story than I had said. On the 7th night we sat on her porch drinking tea and I finally told her everything. Not just the graduation moment but the years of being the unseen sister, the quiet digs, and the way Dad would laud Lily for her existence while dismissing my successes as tasks I had to do anyhow. The strange silences at family dinners. The time they forgot to pick me up from a school trip and didn't realize until the teacher called. Lily was always borrowing money from my room and was never reprimanded. She smashed Mom's old car into a mailbox and I ended up getting grounded for being a bad influence. Maggie Carter did not interrupt me once throughout our nearly 90-minute conversation. When I finally stopped, she sighed slowly and said, "Ethan, I believe you. And I'm sorry." It felt unusual to be believed, to have someone look at me and say without hesitation, "You were mistreated." That night I got the best sleep I'd had in months. But the peace did not endure long. 10 days after I departed, Mom called. I didn't respond. Then followed the texts. One from Dad. "It's time to stop acting like a victim and come home." One from Lily. "Everyone is commenting on how dramatic you are being. You embarrassed Mother in front of her book club." And another from Mom. "Your sister is now going through a lot. Do not add to the tension." That last one grabbed me. Lily was going through a lot. She had a brand new automobile, a graduation party for my graduation, and a large crowd applauding her for doing nothing. But she was stressed. I muted the conversation. A few days later, Maggie Carter received a call. It was Mom. She inquired whether I was still there, if I was okay, and if I had gotten out of my funk. Maggie Carter did not give her much. I just stated I was safe and figuring things out. However, after she hung up, she turned to me and stated, "They aren't phoning because they miss you. They are calling because they are losing control." That remark stuck with me. I spent the following 6 weeks preparing for college. Maggie Carter recommended a late entry program, which I used to secure lodging. I got a job working evenings at a hardware store downtown. I even began taking an online course early on to get ahead. For the first time, I was making my own decisions. There is no requirement for approval or backhanded comments. It felt fantastic. Like I could breathe. Then came the wedding. Lily's dearest friend, an influencer called Sloane Parker, was getting married in August. Lily was a bridesmaid. Clearly my family was invited. Maggie Carter also received one, most likely out of courtesy. I didn't at first. Then 3 weeks before the wedding, Mom contacted Maggie Carter again and left a voicemail. Lily wanted me there. "I know things have been tense," she explained. "However, this is a family event. Lily wants to include you. Let us all go on." Maggie Carter played me the message without comment. At first I declined. Definitely not. But then I thought about how rapidly they were attempting to push things under the rug. Regarding how no one had apologized, I was expected to forget. I was intrigued what it did, and how I looked in their world. So I told Maggie Carter that I'd just go to see. The wedding was placed at a vineyard little under 3 hours from our hometown. Sloane's family possessed money. The entire thing was absurdly over the top. White tents, gold chairs, a live harpist, the works. I arrived in my Soul Navy suit and found my folks standing near the reception tent, holding drinks. Lily wasn't around yet. Mom spotted me first. She smiled. Too fast, too wide. "There's my graduate," she murmured, drawing me in for a hug. It felt staged. Dad nodded. Look who has decided to show up. You tidy up, okay? It was as if they were reading from a script, like nothing had occurred. No mention of the train, no mention of the stillness. Simply welcome back to the narrative, son. Thankfully, the ceremony was quick. Later during the reception, I was seated at a table with distant cousins I barely knew. Lily went by once in her bridesmaid dress and gave me a look like, "You're lucky to be here." Then the speeches began. The maid of honor arrived first, followed by Sloane's parents. Then Lily got up. Apparently she had also been requested to speak. She tapped the microphone and stared directly at me. "I simply want to express," she continued, her voice syrupy sweet, "how grateful I am for my family, for my supporting parents and my brother Ethan, who taught me so much about what not to do." The crowd laughed and laughed. She continued going. "Something about witnessing someone make mistakes and learning from them. About being aware of how fortunate I am not to waste the opportunities that have come my way." I didn't hear the rest. I was staring at the tablecloth and trying to keep my hands from shaking. Maggie Carter was seated 2 tables over. I caught her attention. She was outraged, but I only gave her a stiff smile. I wanted to explore how far this could go. After supper I spotted Lily near the bar. "Really?" I asked gently. She tilted her head. "What?" "That was a joke." "Is this a joke?" I repeated. "At your friend's wedding, in front of 240 guests." She shrugged. "You've been quite theatrical recently. I thought you might use some humility." Something inside me shattered, but it wasn't rage. Not yet. It was the same click I felt after graduating. After that chilly shift and revelation, she no longer sees me as a human. I went without saying goodbye. The next day, I blocked her number. I also blocked Mom and Dad. I didn't want another round of, "she didn't mean it," or, "it was a joke." I was finished faking, but they were not. 4 days later, Maggie Carter received a handwritten letter from my mother, which had 4 pages of remorse, evasion, and barely veiled threats. "The family does not walk away. Lily is under a great deal of pressure. You're making things tougher than they need to be. We didn't raise you to be so harsh." Cruel? They had disregarded me, mocked me, used me as a prop, and now I was being unkind. Maggie Carter observed me reading the letter in quiet. When I folded it and laid it aside, she asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded. Yeah, actually yeah, because something had changed. The wedding speech, the letter, everything. It wasn't simply about disrespect anymore. It was betrayal. Public, intimate, and intentional. And if they wanted to push me out of the family story, that's okay. But I planned to rework the story myself. And after I was finished, they would never be able to say I was merely a waste of talent again. After reading Mom's letter, I didn't say anything for a while. I just sat there, the paper still warm in my hands, its words reverberating in my mind like someone shouting down a hallway. Maggie Carter did not press me. She simply poured me another mug of tea and returned to reading her book across the kitchen table, giving me room as she always did. I wasn't sure how to feel. Anger. I'd already been there. Hurt. That had faded to something colder. I believe what I felt that night was akin to nothingness. Not the spectacular tear-filled type of emptiness, but rather a calm sense of being done with them. With trying, with hoping that one day they'd recognize what they were doing and provide something approximating a genuine apology. I knew it in my bones. They were not going to change. That night, I finally unpacked the duffel bag I had brought from home. Everything I owned fit into 2 drawers in the closet. A few shirts, my laptop, a couple books, some old notebooks filled with half-finished ideas. Apps I wanted to make, product concepts, and little invention ideas I wrote down at 2:30 a.m., and never showed anyone. Back then, I believed one of them might impress Dad. Maybe if I made anything useful or intelligent, he'd look up from his phone and say, "Huh, that's pretty smart, kid." That hadn't happened before. But as I sat on Maggie Carter's guest bed scrolling through the pages, I noticed something. I didn't need to impress him anymore. I just needed to feel proud of myself. So I started to work. The first few weeks were tough. I'd saved some money from my part-time job back home, but it wouldn't last. Maggie Carter offered to pay for some of my early college expenditures, but I didn't want to rely on her unless I had to. I worked shifts in a hardware store, doing stockroom work and running the register when it was busy. It wasn't flashy, but it provided enough income to cover expenses. On evenings when I wasn't working, I spent hours on YouTube watching coding tutorials and business videos. I learned how to develop simple websites, handle databases, and design user interfaces. I didn't know what I was shooting at yet, but I started preparing my toolkit. Every day I set 4 goals. 2 things to learn, 1 to construct, and 1 to think about. It kept me grounded, gave me structure, and I gradually began to feel like myself again. Not the version they defined, but the one that had always been silently beneath the surface. Meanwhile, school began. My new college was not a top-tier university, but it did have a strong engineering program and teachers that genuinely cared. I kept my head down at first, just trying to get through classes and avoid trouble. However, strange things began to happen. I kept being observed. Not from peers attempting to be my friend or anything like that. I still remained to myself, but with teachers. My introduction to engineering professor approached me after our second quiz and asked where I learned to write code like that. I told him about the tutorials, about staying up late to watch videos and work on side projects. "You have an instinct," he explained. "Do not waste it." That stayed with me. That following week I created a basic budgeting application. Nothing spectacular, just a tool to help students keep track of their expenditures. I posted it on a campus forum, not expecting anything. Within a few days it had over 300 downloads, followed by 500 and $1,450. Someone even emailed me to see if I would be interested in doing freelance work. I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. The freelance work earned $750. I used it to upgrade my laptop, get a whiteboard for Maggie Carter's garage, which had effectively become my tiny office, and begin sketching out a new idea, one I'd penned in those old notebooks for years. A website where students can share class notes and study resources. Nothing innovative, but I understood from experience how useful such a resource might be when you didn't have a support system to cheer you on. I named it Study Stack. I worked on it between classes, shifts, and even all night. I brought my laptop to the college cafe, plugged up my headphones, and became lost in the coding. Maggie Carter began putting snacks at the garage door, as if I were a monk at a tech monastery. She didn't inquire about what I was building. She just let me build. I presented it to her one night, probably around 10 weeks ago. She poked around for a few minutes, before looking up and saying, "Ethan, this is actually really cool." That meant more than I could express. Maggie Carter was not one for hollow praises. By winter break I had released a beta version and shared it with a few teachers and students. The answer was better than I had imagined. A few teachers even began endorsing it in their classrooms. Traffic increased dramatically. I had to learn back-end optimization just to keep the site from crashing. Throughout this, my parents never reached out again. Not once. They didn't inquire how I was doing. I did not check to see if I had discovered a school. Did not congratulate me when my app reached 12,000 users. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world. And oddly, I was fine with it because I was noticing something they hadn't seen before. I was not a failure. I did not waste my potential. I was simply someone who needed room to grow without being constantly stepped on. But even as I rebuilt and began to find my rhythm, there were times when it all came flooding back. For example, one night I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She noticed me bagging groceries, gave me a tight smile and said, "Oh Ethan, your mom said you were off soul searching or something." I did not correct her. What was the point? But it reminded me how quickly people believe the version of the story they're told, especially when the person telling it wears pearls and can cry on cue. Nonetheless, I kept building. By late spring, StudyStack had a few thousand regular users, a small recurring revenue stream, and even a community moderator team comprised of college volunteers. I began working with a friend I met on a coding forum, Caleb Wright, a junior from the West Coast with a sarcastic sense of humor and a brain like a CPU. We worked together to add new features, improve the user interface, and make the platform more mobile-friendly. We made little money, but it was ours. After a long day of debugging and caffeine, Caleb Wright texted me, "Bro, we could scale this." I looked at the message for a long time. That word scale implied that it was no longer just a passion project, but could actually be something. It lit a fire in me, and that fire grew even hotter when, one day in June, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. "Hi. It's Lily." Just hearing her name made my chest tighten. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the delete button, but curiosity eventually got the best of me. "I heard you were working on an app. Mom said it's sort of blowing up." I didn't respond. 6 minutes later. "Look, I know things have gotten weird, but we should talk. You are still my brother." Still, my brother. As if she hadn't embarrassed me in front of 240 strangers. As if she hadn't spent years undermining my confidence with a poisonous smile and compliment. I left the message as read. That night I worked until 4:45 a.m., developing the next phase of Study Stack. It was not about vengeance. Not yet. It was not about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself correct. But deep down, I could feel something changing. A quiet momentum is building. And I knew they'd want back in eventually. They would see my name in unexpected places. Hear whispers from people they once impressed. I am curious as to why my cousin mentioned me at a family dinner. Ask me why I didn't attend Thanksgiving. By then, it would not be about forgiveness. It'd be about power. Because for the first time I had it. I never set out to seek vengeance. That is the truth. At first, all I wanted was to survive and prove to myself that I wasn't who they said I was. But somewhere along the line, that quiet resolve began to morph into something sharper. There is no rage, no bitterness, only clarity. The kind you get when you stop waiting for someone to give you permission and begin building your own door. By the time summer rolled into early fall, Study Stack wasn't just a side project anymore. It was becoming a real platform. Students from over 60 campuses had signed up. Professors were emailing me asking if they could integrate it into their syllabi. Caleb Wright and I were holding late-night Zoom calls, talking monetization, API scaling, and pitch decks. And in the middle of it all I was still going to class, still working the register at the hardware store 4 nights a week and still living in Maggie Carter's guest room. That fall, something big happened. A professor in the tech entrepreneurship program, Dr. Elaine Porter, asked me to stay after class. I thought maybe I'd forgotten to submit an assignment, but instead she leaned over her desk and said, "I've been hearing about Study Stack, and I want to introduce you to someone." 3 days later, I was sitting across from a man named Graham Holt, an angel investor who specialized in early-stage education tech. He wore a blazer over a t-shirt, had a voice like gravel and coffee, and listened more than he spoke. I showed him the site, explained how we were helping students crowdsource class notes, and even pulled up our usage analytics. He didn't say much during the presentation, just nodded, took a few notes. Then finally he said, "You built this with no funding, just sweat and sleep deprivation." He smiled. "Keep the scrappy mindset, but I'd like to help you scale." 17 days later, I signed a deal. Not massive, but enough to hire a real developer to help Caleb Wright. Enough to cover my living expenses so I could quit the hardware store. Enough to start planning for mobile app development, and enough to make one thing very, very clear. I was no longer just the kid who left. I was building something real. Something mine. Maggie Carter was the first person I told. She hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. Then she pulled out a dusty bottle of champagne. She said she'd been saving it since her divorce for a real reason, she told me. And this is a real reason. A few nights later, as we were cleaning up after dinner, she asked me quietly, "So, are you going to tell them?" I didn't answer right away, but I thought about it a lot. They hadn't reached out in months. Lily's last text still sat unread. Dad hadn't called. Mom hadn't sent another letter. It was like they were pretending I didn't exist until, of course, someone from their circle mentioned seeing my name in an article on emerging student startups. Or maybe they overheard someone at church talking about a local kid building an app that was really taking off. Whatever it was, it finally broke the silence because in late October, I got a Facebook friend request from Dad, followed by a message. "Saw something about your little project. We're impressed. Let's catch up." Your little project. I looked at the message for a long time. The way it minimized everything. The way it erased the past like none of it had happened. Like the wasted potential comment had just floated away with the wind. Like the graduation snub. The wedding speech. The months of silence. They didn't matter anymore because now I was doing something useful. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a screenshot and sent it to Maggie Carter with one line. "They're waking up. But I wasn't ready. Not yet." See, I didn't just want them to see me. I wanted them to understand, and for that, I needed to wait, watch, plan. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. In November I got invited to speak at a regional education conference. It was mostly small universities, edtech entrepreneurs and investors looking for the next Duolingo, but it was a big deal for someone my age. They even offered to pay for a hotel room and travel expenses. When I mentioned it to Caleb Wright, he nearly exploded. "Bro, you're about to be on stage." I called Dr. Elaine Porter. She helped me prep my speech. Caleb Wright built a real demo for me to showcase. And Maggie Carter bought me a new suit. No questions asked. I stood backstage, heart hammering, watching the presenter before me wrap up. My name appeared on the screen in bold letters. Ethan Carter, founder of StudyStack, building academic community from the ground up. And when I stepped out there, I wasn't thinking about Lily or Dad, or the bag of dollar store sunglasses I got on graduation day. I was thinking about how far I'd come. How I'd done it without applause. Without praise. Without them, the talk went better than I expected. I kept it honest. Talked about the power of underdogs. The way students with no support system still found ways to share knowledge, build community, and help each other survive. I even joked about living out of a garage. The audience loved it. Afterward, a reporter from an education news site interviewed me. The next morning the headline read, "From Family Black Sheep to Student Innovator. How Ethan Carter Built StudyStack in a Garage." That article, it went everywhere. It was retweeted by professors, alumni groups, even a few small venture capital pages. I got 5 speaking requests in a week and an email from a publisher asking if I'd ever considered writing a book about my journey. But the real moment came the day after Thanksgiving. Maggie Carter and I were eating leftovers in front of the TV when her phone buzzed. She picked it up, read something, and smirked. "Well, I think your mother finally read the article." "How can you tell?" She tagged half the extended family and wrote, "So proud of our Ethan. He's always been such a go-getter." I blinked. What? She even put in a winking emoji. I took the phone and stared at the post. It was real. My mom, who hadn't spoken to me in almost a year, was now publicly claiming me as her brilliant, resilient son. There were comments already. Aunt Rebecca Collins, "Wow, I had no idea he was doing so well. You must be so proud." Sloan Parker, "Wait, this is your Ethan. Incredible." And then Lily commented, "That's my brother. Always knew he'd do something amazing." I don't know what broke first, my patience or my self-restraint, because suddenly I saw it all for what it was. They weren't just proud. They were rewriting history. They were claiming my story like they'd been part of it. Like they hadn't driven me out of the house with jokes and silence and cruelty, like they'd supported me all along. I closed the post. I didn't comment. I didn't message anyone. I opened a document instead. Titled it Phase 0, The Rewrite. If they wanted to step back into my life now, I was going to make sure they understood what that actually meant. Not just handshakes and holiday cards. Not just fake pride and Facebook clout. No, this was going to be on my terms. First, I reached out to the conference organizers from the previous month. I offered to do a follow-up webinar for high school students, particularly those from underserved or difficult family backgrounds. I called it Success in Spite of. I told my real story, names omitted, details sharpened. I talked about the night I left home. The half-eaten cake. The graduation joke. The feeling of watching everyone else be celebrated while I disappeared. It hit a nerve. Emails started pouring in. Students, teachers, parents, people who saw themselves in the margins of my story. I wasn't just building an app anymore, I was becoming a voice. Caleb Wright and I talked about expanding the platform, offering scholarships, building a mentoring network, and through it all, I kept tabs on my family. Lily started tagging me in old pictures, school plays, vacations, birthdays, captioned with things like, "So many memories, proud of who you are." Dad updated his LinkedIn to mention that he was father of 2, including rising tech entrepreneur Ethan Carter. Mom sent me a long email titled, "Can we talk?" No apology, just a list of reasons she was confused about why I'd left. Lines like, "We always tried our best," and, "I wish you'd told us how you felt." But that's the thing. I had told them dozens of times in 100 quiet ways. They just never listened. Now they wanted in. And I wasn't going to slam the door in their faces. No, I was going to open it and make them see everything. The hurt, the neglect, the way they only reached out when I had something they wanted. But not yet. First, I needed one more thing. A stage big enough that they couldn't look away. A spotlight so bright they'd be forced to see me. Not as the quiet, invisible son they once overlooked, but as the man I'd become in spite of them. And I knew exactly where to start. By the time winter gave way to late spring, I had everything I needed. StudyStack had crossed 120,000 users. We'd onboarded faculty from over 180 colleges. Caleb Wright and I had officially incorporated. We weren't making 7 figures yet. But we were stable, self-sustaining, and respected in our niche. We had a dev team, 2 part-time moderators, and even a PR consultant helping us navigate all the new media attention. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was Ethan Carter, co-founder, speaker, mentor, and the kid who built an education platform from his aunt's garage after his family wrote him off. And now they wanted back in. After Mom's email, I didn't respond right away. I needed time, not to think but to finish planning. Because the thing about revenge, the kind that doesn't scream or throw punches, is that it takes precision. You don't just lash out. You wait until they've completely underestimated you, until they think you've moved on, until they start bragging about you to people who remember how they used to talk about you behind your back, and then you give them the truth publicly, calmly, undeniably. The opportunity came in the form of a TEDx talk. One of my professors who'd seen my success in spite of webinar nominated me for the event. The theme that year was origins. Fitting. The organizers reached out, vetted me, and gave me the green light. I had 12 minutes on stage, 12 minutes to tell my story in front of a crowd of several hundred in a live stream that would reach tens of thousands. So, I wrote a talk, rewrote it, sharpened it like a blade. No names, no direct accusations, just the truth laid out like puzzle pieces only the guilty would recognize. When the day came, I wore the same navy suit I'd worn to Lily's wedding, the one I'd stood in while she mocked me from the stage. Maggie Carter was in the front row. Caleb Wright was watching online from his apartment in Oregon. And somewhere, because I made sure of it, my parents were watching too, because I'd sent them VIP passes, handwritten invites, a polite professional letter on official study stack letterhead. I'll be speaking at TEDx this Saturday. I thought you'd want to be there. I even included a line that said, "Since I know you've been telling people how proud you are, I figured you might want to see it live." No malice, no threat, just bait. And they took it. They showed up. I saw them when I stepped on stage. Fourth row. Dad in a sports coat that still had the price tag thread hanging from the sleeve. Mom with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lily wasn't there. Or if she wasn't close enough for me to see. Fine by me. The lights dimmed. The applause faded. I stepped forward and began. I started with the night of my graduation. How I got a bag of dollar store sunglasses and a joke about wasted potential. How my sister was gifted a car, a party, and a glowing speech. How that night I packed a bag and took an after-midnight train alone. I described what it felt like to realize you'd been invisible in your own home. To have your achievements ignored, your milestones dismissed. I spoke slowly, clearly, never once raising my voice. Then I shifted. I talked about rebuilding, about Maggie Carter, though I never used her name, about the quiet sanctuary of a garage-turned-office. About what it means to find worth without validation. About how many students like me exist, talented, motivated but invisible, and how I built StudyStack not in spite of my background but because of it. And finally, I closed with this. The people who believed in me could be counted on two hands, but that was enough, because what I learned the hard way is that sometimes the people who break you do it so slowly you don't even realize you're bleeding until you leave the room and the silence feels like oxygen. So if you've ever been laughed at by the people who should have clapped, if you've ever been told you were wasted potential by someone who never saw your worth, I want you to know their approval is not the prize. You are. And the most satisfying success story isn't the one where they cheer you on. It's the one where they have to sit in the audience while you tell the truth. There was a beat of silence, then applause, then a standing ovation. I didn't look at my parents during the talk, but when I stepped off stage, I glanced their way. Mom was pale, frozen. Hands still clasped, now white-knuckled. Dad was leaning back, expression unreadable, like someone trying to decide whether to be angry or impressed. I didn't give them the chance to approach me. Maggie Carter and I slipped out the side door and into the parking lot. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a bottle of water and squeezed my shoulder. Finally she said, "That was beautiful, kid." I nodded. "Think they got the message?" She smiled. "Oh, they got it." But the real fallout came in the days after the TEDx video hit YouTube. Within 16 days, it had over 780,000 views. Comments poured in. Stories. Thanks. People sharing their own experiences with being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. I started getting requests to speak at high schools, corporate leadership summits, even a nonprofit event focused on parental estrangement. StudyStack's user base doubled in 6 weeks. We were featured in a tech podcast that called us the most quietly disruptive ed tech startup of the year. And then the private messages started from family. Aunt Rebecca Collins emailed me. "I had no idea it was that bad, Ethan. I'm so sorry we didn't see it. Your talk made me cry." My cousin Sloan Parker messaged me on Instagram. "Mom's been telling everyone your TED talk made your dad look bad, but I watched it. You didn't make him look bad. He did that on his own." Then came the group chat message. "Lily, so I guess you're famous now. Kinda messed up. You aired our family drama on the internet." I didn't reply. Then Mom emailed again. This time it was different. No excuses, no rewriting. Just this. I watched it. All of it. I'm sorry for everything. We failed you. I understand now why you left. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. If not, I get it. I really do. I stared at it for a long time. And then I archived it, not because I didn't believe her, but because it didn't change anything. Sometimes forgiveness isn't a door you open. It's a weight you put down and walk away from. I didn't need an apology to move forward. I'd already moved. Maggie Carter helped me buy my first apartment that late summer. Just a small place with sunlight through the kitchen windows and enough space for a second monitor. Caleb Wright flew out to visit, and we mapped out Study Stack's next phase on a whiteboard over tacos and cheap beer. Life kept going better, freer. And when people asked where I came from, I told them the truth. I came from silence. From jokes at my expense, from being invisible at my own graduation, but I turned that silence into fuel. The jokes into clarity, the invisibility into something they couldn't ignore. And in the end, when they were finally forced to see me, not the version they'd invented, but the person I actually was, they couldn't look away. That was the revenge. Not a fight. Not a scream. Not a public takedown or a dramatic confrontation. Just being undeniable. That's how you win. And as for them, they can keep telling whatever version of the story helps them sleep. I'll keep living the one they never saw coming. I was the disappointment until I stopped asking for their approval and became their.